Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the profound historical events and the massive philosophical legacy of Karbala. Whether you know this history inside and out, or you're looking at it from a totally fresh perspective, the ideas we're going to unpack today are incredibly powerful. We're talking about a single day back in 680 CE that literally still shapes the moral compass of millions of people around the globe right now. So let's dive into this deeply fascinating historical mystery. How exactly does a devastating military defeat turn into a timeless global movement? I mean, it kind of defies all conventional logic, right? Usually history is written by the victors, and military defeats just fade into the background. But the story of Imam Hussain, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, does the exact opposite. To understand why his martyrdom on the 10th of Muharram, a day known as Ashura, resonates so intensely, we've got to look way past the physical battlefield and dig into the core philosophy behind it. To really grasp the magnitude of Karbala, we need to quickly trace the roots of this divide. You see, the stage for this event was actually set decades before. According to Shia belief, there was a clear designation for the Prophet's successor after he passed away in 632 CE, but political authority ended up taking a totally different path, and this caused some deep divisions. If we fast forward through years of conflict and the tragic assassination of the fourth caliph, Imam Ali, we hit a major turning point. Imam Ali's eldest son, Imam Hussain, signs a peace treaty with the Syrian governor, Muawiyah. Why? Specifically to stop the bloodshed. And a huge condition of that treaty was absolutely no hereditary succession. But around 680 CE, Muawiyah completely breaks that promise. He appoints his own son Yazid to take over. From the Shia historical perspective, what started out as a dispute over succession had now dangerously morphed into a full-blown hereditary monarchy. And that shifting power dynamic forces a monumental choice. A straight-up refusal to bow. Just look at the stark contrast in leadership here. On one hand, you have Hussein, whose entire focus was strictly on moral reform and preserving the foundational principles of Islam. He absolutely refused to legitimize tyranny. On the other hand, historical sources associate Yazid's rule with intense moral corruption, injustice, and severe oppression. For Hussein, pledging allegiance to Yazid wasn't just some minor political concession. It would literally mean endorsing the corruption of the very faith his grandfather established. In fact, historical sources record this incredibly powerful declaration from Hussein, laying all his cards on the table. He said he wasn't rising up for power or arrogance, but simply to reform the nation and stand up for what's right. He treated this defiance as a profound moral stand, not some political power grab. He completely strips away any accusation of personal ambition, framing his entire uprising around pure reform and justice. Think about how incredibly rare that is when we look at medieval political struggles. Knowing exactly how dangerous this defiance was, Hussein made his move. He left his home in Medina peacefully, specifically to avoid causing any bloodshed there. Initially, he received thousands of letters of support from the people of Kufa in Iraq, but that support, it was violently crushed by the Umayyad government through totally ruthless intimidation. They even executed Hussein's emissary, his cousin Muslim ibn Aqil. Even knowing his political support had completely crumbled overnight, Hussein kept going toward Iraq. He knew exactly what was waiting for him, but preserving his principles was just that paramount. This relentless journey sets the stage for the absolute tragedy of Karbala on the desert plains in 61 AH. 72. It's almost hard to wrap your head around this number. Against an opposing force of thousands of heavily armed soldiers, Hussein stood with just 72 devoted companions. This wasn't a sprawling army. It was a tight-knit group of family members, close friends, and fiercely loyal supporters standing absolutely resolutely against an entire empire. The cruelty of this standoff escalated so quickly. The opposing army literally blocked off all access to the Euphrates River. For 3 whole days, Hussein's camp was forced to endure intense, agonizing thirst under the scorching desert sun. We're talking about elderly folks, teenagers, and even toddlers being entirely cut off from water. Yet, despite these horrific physical conditions, Hussein continually tried to find peaceful alternatives to avoid bloodshed. But he flat out refused the one demand the opposing army insisted on, which was unconditional allegiance to Yazid. And that refusal ultimately led to the 10th of Muharram, the day we know as Ashura. According to Shia historical accounts, the battle was just absolute devastation. Because they were so heavily outnumbered, his companions went out onto the battlefield one by one. They were fighting for principle, not conquest. The historical accounts detailed these deeply tragic losses. Young teenagers, and even Hussein's 6-month-old infant son, who was struck by an arrow right in his father's arms. Finally, completely exhausted, terribly thirsty, and deeply grieving, Hussein himself was martyred, and his body was trampled by horses. From a strictly military perspective, it looked like total annihilation. But as history shows us, it was really just the beginning. Enter our second hero. The aftermath of the battle was unimaginably brutal. The surviving women and children of Hussein's camp were taken captive. They were marched as prisoners all the way to Kufa and eventually to the capital, Damascus. Imagine carrying the incredibly heavy burden of having just witnessed the massacre of your brothers, your fathers, and your sons. The Umayyad rulers fully intended to parade them around to showcase their absolute victory and crush any tiny bit of remaining dissent. But that plan completely backfired. Standing there as a captive right in front of Yazid himself, Imam Hussein's sister, Lady Zainab, delivered these incredibly courageous, defiant speeches that just completely exposed the regime's injustice. She boldly looked right at the ruler and told him that he could never erase their remembrance. Through her pure courage and eloquence, she single-handedly transformed a devastating military tragedy into a moral victory that could never be erased. Honestly, she is the reason this story even survived. Because Lady Zainab's defiant voice preserved the absolute truth of what happened. The blood spilled at Karbala didn't just fade away into the desert sand. It built an eternal global legacy. According to Shia thought, the entire philosophy of Ashura is anchored in this really profound, uncompromising view on human dignity. Hussein firmly believed that living under a corrupt tyrant just to survive was a form of profound humiliation. It compromised the soul. When he said death with dignity is better than life with humiliation, he was distilling the absolute essence of his uprising. True life isn't just a beating heart. It's living with your principles fully intact. And these actions give us some universally actionable principles. The legacy of Karbala teaches us that prioritizing justice over oppression, truth over falsehood, and faith over fear isn't just some nice historical rhetoric. It's an actual blueprint for human dignity. The core takeaway for us here is that silence before injustice is, in and of itself, a profound injustice. By refusing to submit, Hussein drew a major line in the sand for all of human history. The impact of drawing that line echoes incredibly loudly today. Just look at the breathtaking juxtaposition here. From 72 isolated, thirsty companions who fell centuries ago to what is now literally the world's largest annual peaceful gathering, the Arba'een pilgrimage. Today, millions of people from all walks of life walk hundreds of kilometers to Karbala, sharing food and shelter in pure solidarity, all directly inspired by that tiny group from 680 CE. It's a living, breathing testament to the survival of those principles. What's even more amazing is that this message is so universally resonant that it completely shatters religious boundaries. Non-Muslim leaders, like Mahatma Gandhi, have drawn direct inspiration from Hussein's refusal to compromise. When Gandhi was leading the Indian independence movement, he recognized that moral victory is so often achieved through personal sacrifice rather than military might. Ultimately, history belongs to those who stand firm in their truth. And that brings us to this incredibly poignant final quote from an Imam Hussain on the battlefield. His timeless call continues to echo across the centuries. He's fiercely demanding that humanity stand up for truth, no matter the cost, appealing to our shared sense of human freedom and conscience, regardless of what our personal religious beliefs might be. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final, vital question. The philosophy of Ashura isn't just about remembering a historical tragedy. It's like a mirror held up to our own lives. When the pressure is really on, when it feels so much easier to just go along with the crowd or submit to something you know deep down is wrong, what are the core principles you would absolutely refuse to compromise on? Take a moment to think about that and how the echoes of Karbala might apply to your own worldview today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.